I founded an organization called Love and Justice in the Streets, and it's an all volunteer effort. And we do work in three ways. I started by just getting to know unhoused members of my community in my neighborhood, and by going out and talking to folks and asking them if there were things they needed and ways that I could support them, and learning directly from them, and then taking that back to my housed community and trying to generate resources so that I could help to redistribute resources to meet people's direct needs. So one of the ways that we're doing this work is through mutual aid, through providing tents, blankets, medicine, food, socks, whatever people need, shoes, and 100% of what is being fundraised is going directly out into the community. So that's one way. Then the second way is by bearing witness to evictions, to sweeps that are happening every week in Oakland, Monday through Thursday. The city is coming out and forcing people who are living in encampments and living on the streets to move and not giving them anywhere to go. So being out and bearing witness to this form of state violence is a really important piece because it creates a buffer between police. It supports residents who are experiencing this state violence. And it's a way to then I can come back and amplify this to other people who may not be able to be out there themselves, who don't know what's going on. Because part of why this is happening is because it's so invisible and people aren't seeing what's happening. So the third way that Love and Justice in the Streets is doing work is through political advocacy, working at mostly the city level to push for policies and for funding that upholds human rights, specifically for unhoused people. And that's kind of what encompasses the work. So the Wood Street encampment is the largest encampment currently in Oakland, California. And there's about between 200 and 300 people living in this encampment. It's really kind of spread out into different neighborhoods. So there's different pockets of people, but then there's cross-pollination and people know each other across the encampment. So there's one section that I want to specifically highlight, which is the Wood Street Commons, which you have been spending time at as well, which is a really organized neighborhood in the encampment. And they have a communal kitchen, and they have a communal fire pit, and they have seating, and they are cooking food and sharing food with each other every night. And volunteers who are housed, who have access to resources, and other organizations are bringing donations to them. But it's also that people who are in this community are pooling their own resources and are supporting each other in a community of care. And there's people of all different backgrounds, many people who have jobs, who are employed, who are living there, as well as people who have very significant disabilities and are unable to work. So it's a huge range of who's there. But what's so stunning is that people are in community with each other and caring for each other and making sure that with what little many of them have access to, that they're sharing, and that they're supporting one another. So this is in a bigger context of the city and the state really failing to meet people's basic human rights. People have no water access. They have the food access that they come up with themselves or is donated, and they have no regular sanitation. There's 2 porta potties at this site, but there's hundreds of people, so it's ridiculous. And then the trash isn't being picked up regularly. So it's creating these dangers that are unnecessary and that are state created dangers that could immediately be solved with the support. And residents have been organized and have been asking for years that the city provide basic services such as trash pickup and fire extinguishers and clean water, and they have refused. So that is the context in which these massive evictions are in the process of taking place. Is really the next couple of weeks is going to be the next stage of a mass eviction that's evicting over 200 people with nowhere to go. So I think this is a part of the misinformation that's so dangerous, is that a lot of unhoused people get labeled as service resistant, as if they don't want housing. And that's just simply not true. What's true is that there's no housing being offered. What's being offered is shelter beds, mostly congregate shelter beds, share with other people, right? So either a room, a cot on the floor with many people in a room, or to be forced into a small, tiny home box that's like 10 feet with a stranger, with another roommate. So it's this isn't many people, for example, at the Wood Street encampment are living in vehicles. They have self-determination, they have privacy, they can be with their pets and their partners and come in and do what they want. They're adults and they're living their lives. And the shelters have all kinds of rules and all kinds of restrictions and are also extremely inaccessible, specifically to people with disabilities. So there's a lot of barriers and a lot of reasons why when the city is offering these shelter beds, they're not explaining what exactly they're offering. And the truth of it is that I wouldn't want almost any of these options, that they're not safe and they're not adequate. And so the choice isn't a real choice that's being offered to people when people are already living in communities of care with other folks that they know and that they trust, and that they have created for themselves shelter. So it's really important to understand that this isn't an individual person's fault. This is structural. This is about systems that are failing people and that are set up to fail people and that are set up to create a society in which some people have access to all of the wealth and all of the goods, and many people have access to almost nothing. So when we talk about addiction and when we talk about mental illness, it's important to note that many, many housed people also experience both addiction and mental illness. And the thing that's different is that people who are living unhoused are exposed. They don't have privacy. So that's part of what's going on here. There are many unhoused people who are not using drugs or who do not have mental illnesses, who are also living unhoused, and that's about lack of access of housing. And so it's really important that we continue to come back to that point, that the problem isn't that people have failed. The problem is that our society has failed and that there's not political will to create a society in which everyone has access to the basic human rights of shelter. So in Oakland, for example, right now, there are thousands of empty units, empty apartments, empty houses, and empty land. People could be housed now if there was the political will and if our society chose to invest in that value system. So this really comes down to an ethical choice. Basically, cities across the country have set up entire departments that are responsible for sweeping unhoused people and for cleaning up encampments, resolving encampments without putting that where that money could be put into housing. That money could go into real solutions, but instead we're putting it into police that are terrorizing people and that are causing even more harm to people who are some of the most vulnerable members of our communities. This is a way to pit vulnerable people against each other. It's almost always Black and brown people who are in the positions of doing the evictions, of doing the sweeps, and of doing the cleanup. The specific sweeps that are going on at Wood Street right now are state sweeps, because Caltrans is a state agency and they have hired subcontracted workers. So they have about like 100 probably undocumented laborers who are probably getting paid terribly, who are coming to do this work. And we have the volunteers had set up a table with food and water for the residents who are being evicted. And at one point, one of the workers came up and asked for food because they weren't getting any food or water. And several workers came to use the porta potty that was next to the canopy that we had set up with the food and water. And it wasn't our porta potty, it was a public porta potty, but they were asking permission. And what I think was happening is that they didn't want their bosses to see them, that they were taking a break to use the bathroom. So they were like being able to come over to our porta potty, the one near us, and use that. So it's really disgusting what's going on in terms of pitting communities against each other. And many of the people who are doing this work are probably one step away from being unhoused themselves if they aren't already unhoused. Yeah, so when I talk about encampments, I often talk about communities of care because people are being forced into extreme circumstances, but they're choosing, many of them are choosing not to do it alone, but to be together for more safety or to share resources. So when people are swept and there's no place for people to go, it divides these communities. Another thing that happens is that oftentimes the leadership in these encampments is first offered housing. And that destabilizes any kind of organizing efforts that are going on if you remove the people who are the most capable or are in the roles of both leading and caretaking for other more vulnerable members of the encampment. So it's extremely harmful on many levels. The other thing I want to just mention is that sweeps that I've been to over the years, I've seen people have seizures. There was someone who had a heart attack. These have an extreme consequences to people's health. They are deeply, deeply traumatizing and violent. Being forced under police, the threat of police to move with nowhere to go is an extreme act of state violence, and it creates more trauma for people who many of whom already have a lot of trauma from being forced to live outside. Yeah, in 2017, I had the privilege of being a part of a contingent that welcomed Leilani Farah, who was at the time the special rapporteur on the right to adequate housing, to Oakland and to tour encampments in Oakland, including the Wood Street encampment. And she wrote a report, an international report, naming cities across the globe as and uplifting human rights violations that were going on. And in this report, she named Oakland and San Francisco specifically as cruel and inhumane. And she did that because not only of the level of extreme poverty that she witnessed, that people were living in without basic human rights like access to water and shelter, but also because of the extreme disparity of wealth, because there is so much resource in this country and in Oakland and in San Francisco, and there is so much potential that there's no need for people to be living in these circumstances, and that truly is cruel and inhumane. Well, I want to invite everyone to take a step back, and next time you see someone who's living in the streets, who's unhoused, who's asking for support, if you see someone on a corner with a sign or someone who's asking for tzedakah and who's in need of support, that you stop and you ask them what they truly need. And then you go and respond to that need, whether that's food or water or clothing, that that we each take a risk and kind of push ourselves as housed people to move through our fear of someone that we don't know and of the stereotypes that we are taught, to be afraid of people that we don't know, and that we truly uphold people's humanity. And this can happen just on an individual level. It's really important. I carry in my purse, I carry socks and peanut butter, and I have water bottles in my car and sleeping bags and tents, so that when I encounter someone, I can meet some immediate need and really engage with that person with a sense of dignity. And it is overwhelming the amount of blessings that I receive when I come and treat people with dignity. And so I invite you to join me in doing that, and then to be organizing on a bigger level and to be pushing for systemic change as well, because it's unacceptable right now that we have thousands and thousands of people who are being forced to live without access to basic human rights.